So again, welcome everybody to this month's webinar Wednesday. We'll be talking about the Museum Collections and Resource Grant. I have my little chat open if you need to ask any questions. Feel free to do so or holler at me if I'm going too fast. So let's get started. For those of you who do not know who we are Humanities Arkansas. We have changed our name from Arkansas Humanities Council. We are still a nonprofit affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our mission is to empower Arkansans to connect with the humanities by encouraging the discovery and understanding of our diverse and mutual experiences. And we do that largely through our own programming, but also through our grant making as well. And so for this evening, just doing an overview of what the Museum Collections and Resource Grant is, eligibility, eligible projects, the letters of intent, application, then the review and evaluation process, and then what happens if you're awarded. So the Museum Collections and Resource Grant, we have recently reduced our maximum award amounts beginning January 1 of this year. So the maximum award now is $3,000 instead of $5,000. We still do not require a cost share as a part of this grant. This upcoming cycle opens next week on the 15th and will run through the 28th for the letters of intent. And then the application deadline will be in April for this upcoming cycle. As far as eligibility, most museums, archives, and public libraries in our state have an annual budget of under $500,000. That is who we're trying to reach. We're trying to reach small museums, archives, and public libraries. We do require that they be open to the general public for virtual and or virtual programmings and activity. This last bullet here about seeking funds for conservation, we do require that if you're going to do that, you contract with a certified or licensed conservator who has that particular specialty. So as far as what is not eligible for this grant is the purchase of collections or artifacts. Programming special events or similar activities are also ineligible. Digitization for the preservation of access of documents, photographs, maps, and so forth are eligible, but not for very large digitization projects. We ask that you apply for our major grant for that instead of the museum collections. This is more for like small projects. If you're doing an extensive digitization project, especially one that is going to lend itself more towards programming, the major grant would be a better fit for that particular project. So just very quickly about the humanities versus the arts. I only make this note because this grant overlaps a lot with our operational grant. And with our operational mini grant, we do require that the organizations applying be humanities in mission and not art in mission. That's not necessarily a requirement we have for the museum collections grant, but being able to pull from those humanities content as to the purpose of your project, that'll help your application be stronger going forward. So humanities is talking about the arts, talking about humanity through archaeology, art history, cultural anthropology, ethics, ethnic studies, folklore, and so on. The arts do. I really like the way Wisconsin Humanities talks about the differences between the two because they are so intertwined and you can't have one without the other. So the arts do, the humanities talk about it. And so being able to lean on those principles in your project description is helpful, or explaining why this funding is really important to your organization or to your mission as an organization. So the types of projects that are eligible for this grant is professional development, collections management, conservation and preservation, conservation materials, equipment, museum racks and cabinets, care of special collections, digitization projects, risk assessment, and emergency planning. To get into the nitty-gritty about what each can get into. Our grant guidelines on our website have very minute like specifics. So like professional development can be for workshops in or out of state. It just can't be international. Collections management and getting personnel or software to help do that. Conservation and preservation is hiring the conservator. Conservation materials and acid-free boxes, tissue, those sorts of materials. Equipment, such as scanners, and computers and laptops, those kinds of things. Museum racks and cabinets or museum racks and cabinets. Care for special collections and so on. Those are all pretty self-explanatory. I will note that there's not a monetary limit on equipment or supplies for this grant. For our project grants, such as the major grant, mini grant, and all of those, to purchase equipment like a scanner or a computer or camera, there is a cap of $1,000. And so that's not a limitation we have on this particular grant. So once you're ready to apply, the letter of intent is just a preliminary form that helps us verify your organization is eligible for this grant through tax exemption, project description, and initial budget. You have to submit a letter of intent before pursuing the official application, and we will only consider letters of intent that are submitted by the due date. And so for this cycle, that deadline will be February 28th. And so for tax exemption, we require the employment identification number or EIN, letter of determination from the IRS, and a unique entity ID. This is all showing that your organization is tax exempt. For museums, libraries that are part of a city or as a part of the municipality, sometimes that looks a little wonky and we'll ask you for different identification to show that you're tax exempt. I know some are tied that way and it's a little funky, but we'll work with you to make sure that works out. The unique entity ID is registered through sam.gov. If your organization doesn't already have that number, it takes about 2 weeks on average to get that all kind of settled. But that number needs to be actively registered, not just the ID assigned or having its registration lapsed. It does need to be fully active throughout the grant period. The project description, that's basically the who, what, when, where, why of your project and what you're requesting funds for. We should be able to clearly understand why you're requesting funds, what those funds will do, and who is involved with the project. Your initial project budget will show us what the expenses you're expecting to incur for the project, and that should corroborate with your project description so that you're not requesting things that are not described in your project description. If you have cost share, feel free to include that with your budget, but it's not a requirement. This can be done on a spreadsheet, a Word doc. It's just kind of showing us what you plan on doing with your funding. So once you've submitted your letter of intent, Humanities Arkansas staff will review your responses and your financial documentation. We're looking to make sure everything is complete and correct and up to date. So if it is approved, we will move it forward to the application. If there are any issues, we'll be in touch, and we may have you resubmit your letter of intent, or we'll just have you send us additional information. So once we re-review that, it'll be approved or denied depending on if your project is eligible or if it's ready to move forward for the application. Once you've reached the formal application, you'll need to designate your grant period timeline. So what is the timeline of you completing your project? The grant period doesn't officially begin until June 1. That's when payments would be at the earliest. And your project can run from June 1 through May 31st of the following year. So for this year, June 1, 2025 through May 31 of 2026. And then we'll ask for information about your organization, such as your congressional district, which regions or counties are served by your organization. We'll ask for your finance contact information. So this is the person at your organization who handles the finances. This person must be a different person than who is applying or is the project director. Those need to be two separate people. The finance contact is the person we'll work with in getting those disbursements and payments sent out and make sure they're paid properly. They will also work with the project director in making sure all the receipts and financial payments are handled properly. We will ask for a more thorough project description about your project. It should be fairly similar to what you've submitted in your letter of intent. If it's a little more fleshed out, that's great. Then we'll get into the grant purpose, which is those eligible types of funding projects that you can do for this grant. So the professional development, the museum racks and cabinets, digitization, risk assessment, any of those categories, it is a checkbox. And so you'll just check which ones apply for your project. And so when you check, if you check museum racks and cabinets, it'll prompt you further in the application to submit information about the plan, timetable, quotes, and estimates for your museum racks and cabinets. So what make, model, quantity, what are you using them for? Why have you selected the specific one? How does it fit in your space? And being able to provide quotes for that particular cabinet. And so for each type of project, you'll have to do the same thing. So if you select museum racks and cabinets and then the conservation materials, you'll have to provide that information for both types. And then we'll get into project planning and the statement of purpose. And so that's as your project as a whole. How was it planned? The purpose, how it will be evaluated, what is the statement of need, what is the impact this would have for your organization and for your constituents, as well as any additional personnel information, CVs, resumes, biographies for your conservators or anyone you're hiring to do this kind of work. So again, depending on the type of project you're doing will require different information, as well as the budget information. And so with the quotes that you've provided for the particular type of project you are doing, we also have our own PDF fillable forms where you'll take your quotes and your full request amount, and you'll fill that in as far as line items. And we're going to look at that form in just a second. There's 3 pages. It is a summary that's just kind of giving us the overview of your funding request and the expenses you're expecting. Then there is a spreadsheet and how your expenses break out, whether it's for personnel or if it's for supplies, equipment, that kind of stuff. And then in the explanation, you'll tie all of your quotes together and why these particular expenses are necessary for your project and how they are justified. And so all of the PDF of the budget should match together and line up, as well as match with the quotes that you've provided in the previous sections. And so all quotes are required for any kind of expense on the project that is not a federal or state rate. And so those are typically mileage. So if you're doing the professional development and you need to travel for a workshop or for a conference, you'll use the federal mileage rate to calculate that cost. But there's not a rate for a cabinet, so you'll have to submit a quote for that particular expense. And so this is the top sheet for our budget. This is the summary, and this is showing all of those blanks. If you're contributing any kind of cash or in-kind contributions for cost share, those will go in 1, 2, 3, not required. But if you are doing any of those kinds of contributions, we do ask that you report it. What you're requesting from us for this grant will go in number 4. And if you have a combination of both, you'll put that total in number 5. Here is that second sheet where you start breaking down those large totals. So if you're requesting fund from us for cabinets and materials, you'll put that under number 3, supplies, under AHC grant requested. If you're requesting scanners or other kinds of equipment, you'll put that in number 6. If you're requesting software or anything like that, you can put that under other. If you're hiring a conservator or if you're hiring someone to do a digitization project, you could put that under personnel, either as a salary or honoraria for doing the project. And if you're doing any kind of cost share, you'll put that under your cost share columns. But again, not required. If you have it, great. If not, no problem. So once you fill out those top two sheets, you get into the budget explanation, and this is where you take those numbers you put in the previous sheets and explain what those are. And those should match all of the quotes that you provided in the previous sections. If there are quotes that were not provided in the previous sections, you'll just attach it to the back of this PDF and upload all of it. And so all of the financial documentation that you upload to your application should all add up nicely and neatly and match across all the sections. So once you have all of the things for your application ready to go, you can submit it and staff will review. We'll review your responses and financial documentation. We're looking for completeness and thoroughness. If we need any additional information or if something's wonky with your budget, we'll send it back and ask you for that information. We'll re-review it. And then either it'll go to the board for evaluation or we'll ask that you resubmit at another time, depending on how complete your application is. Once an application is ready to go to the board will review for, they'll evaluate the proposals and score them, and they will make the decision as far as funding. And then the applicant at the end of the process will be notified if their proposal has been approved or denied, if we have any additional questions or any kind of stipulations as far as the funding and what you're requesting for. If awarded, comes the post-award reporting. First will be the grant agreement and pay request. This is basically kind of getting into the legality and the contracting between us as your grantor and you as the grantee. The grant agreement is a contract between the grantee, your financial contact, and us that kind of outlines the conditions of the grant. And then your pay request is what begins the payment going forward for you to receive funding for your project. We have eliminated quarterly reports for all of our grant processes. And so if you have any questions between the beginning and the end of your project, always feel free to reach out. But at the end of your project, when it's completed, there will be a final report where you will submit any kind of evaluations and data over the course of the project, impact statements, the success of the project's planning, implementation. If you had any difficulties or things came up, you would include that as well. And then we'll ask for that final budget and project receipts. So all expenses that you incurred over the course of your project, you'll put all of that in your final report. And so you'll have until a year, you'll have a full year to complete your project. So that June 1 through the May 31st, that will be the time period in which you will complete your project and all of its reporting. And so for this particular grant, we award all funding up front with your grant agreement and pay request. So once all of that is complete, everyone signed everything they need to, we'll send off that payment. At the end of your project, you'll submit your final report and receipts. And then to be able to close out your grant, we'll need to have all of that information. We do ask that all reports be submitted on time, and failure to do so could result in non-compliance and possible requirements to return funds or ineligibility for future grants. And so just kind of our disclaimer as far as non-compliance, we do understand things happen. The world is unpredictable, but reach out to us, let us know what's going on. We're happy to work with you as far as timelines. But if we don't know, we can't help. And that does sometimes result in consequences of returning funds and being ineligible for future grants. So let us know, just keep us in the loop. More emails, the better. We love to know what's going on. And so just as a recap, The Museum Collections and Resource Grant is a $3,000 maximum award. Cost share is not required. Our upcoming cycle opens next week on January 15th, and we will be accepting letters of intent till the end of February with a formal application deadline in April. So if you have any questions as far as this grant, I would be the person you would talk to. My email is here. My colleague Asia, she handles our Black History and Culture grants, and we co-work the major grants and mini grants. So feel free to reach out to her as well if you have any interest in either of those.
Thank you for being here, and I hope to talk to you soon.